Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
My father has a PhD and was addressed for many years as Dr. Lehto. One of the administrators at a school I went to, the principal, had a PhD also. We called him Doctor before his name. And so there's been some controversy lately about people calling themselves doctor when they have a PhD, but it's actually been something that's been happening for quite some time. But interestingly, George sent me a note and said, Steve, check out this story from California from pacificlegal.org, and Pacific Legal is the organization helping this person in the story. Brittany Hunter wrote it. California's law on who can use the title doctor, or DR period, threatens the livelihoods of healthcare professionals. So, for example, they tell a story here of a nurse who her entire life had been looking at getting into medicine. Her parents had bought her, MCAT books and so on. So it'd be nearly 40 years before she got there, but she would eventually fulfill her father's hopes, earning a doctorate of nursing practice, or a DNP, which is the highest degree available in advanced nursing. So she would have people address her as Dr. Sarah. Now, that endearing and accurate title creates a nightmare for her after the Medical Board of California, as well as the SLO County District Attorney's Office, we call it, San Luis Obispo, and the Board of Registered Nursing came after her for violating a law that forbids doctors of nursing practice from calling themselves doctor, even if they always clarify that they are simply nurse practitioners and not medical doctors of the other sort. So it turns out that she's facing either having her career threatened, or she could leave the state, because other states apparently allow people with a doctorate in nursing to call themselves doctors. So she's always taking pleasure in caring for others, and so here's where she is. So she speaks about her dad who died when she was 23, and her face lights up, and she said you'd forget he was in a wheelchair. It's one of those people that didn't look at a disability as a problem, and we just go through life. It's how I grew up in my mindset. I have a weird ability to look at disabilities and say, okay, but what can we do? What can we do with this? So she grew up, married young, had 4 kids, got a divorce, and during her married years, she didn't go to school, so she had limited career choices. But at 38, she started over. She began working for an associate provost at the University of Kentucky who pushed her to go back to school. She loved the idea, at least in theory, but she was almost 40 years old, and the idea of starting a career from scratch seemed unrealistic, and she kept thinking, you're too old to go into nursing at 38. But her boss assured her that her fears could be overcome. At his encouragement, she took the chance, went back to school, and exceeded her own expectations. I went to school at the University of Kentucky to get my bachelor's, then went to Vanderbilt for my master's and my doctorate, she explains. She also remarried. This time the husband supports her career ambitions, and she felt called to go into healthcare. She also says that was what her father wanted for her. So the conundrum she now faces was deciding which field to pursue. I sat and seriously looked at my choices. She remembers, do I want to be a physician? Do I want to be a PA? Do I want to become a nurse practitioner? So she went the nurse practitioner route on purpose because she believed that nurses looked at patients the way that she does. I'd already studied herbalism. I was pretty jaded against a lot of stuff that happens in medicine. I got into functional medicine and autoimmune diseases and the things that I work mostly with now. So she and her husband moved to California where she could pursue her dreams. And for her, helping patients is about more than just diagnosing and sending them home with medication. It's not to say she's against medication. She just likes to look at the bigger picture and make sure she gets to see all the angles of the situation. She says, I love a puzzle. I love putting the puzzle together, and the patients need somebody that will do that. When it comes to her patients, solving puzzles often means treating the underlying issue of vitamin deficiencies and making sure her patients could correct those issues before doling out medication. And her patients love her. In fact, she is so loved at the height of her career, she was treating about 650 people. But of course, what happened next is the problem. For some reason, unbeknownst to her, an anonymous complainant contacted the state medical board and reported that she called herself doctor. She said that she had a DR in front of her name. A directive baked into California's Medical Practice Act, which is a law, makes it a crime for any healthcare professional other than licensed physicians or surgeons to call themselves doctor or put the DR on signs, business cards, or letterhead, or in ads. And you're violating that, you could be facing the loss of your license as well as fines. The prohibition often is justified as helping protect patients from fraud or injury, but the truth is that California's restriction of the word doctor has nothing to do with patient protection. California is appropriating the word doctor for certain protected professions, and oddly, neither doctor nor doctors appear anywhere. I'm talking about the DR or the DOCTOR, appear anywhere on their certificates issued by the state. So, okay. So she found it confusing. Other people have found it confusing. And of course, it really affects her. She said, I'd actually asked both the Nurse Practitioner Association and the Board of Nursing if it was okay to use the title doctor, DR. And they were like, well, just as long as you let everybody know you're a nurse practitioner and not a physician. So everything, every piece of anything that you will find on me had Dr. Sarah Ernie. Right below that was nurse practitioner. But these assurances were empty as she continued to face retribution because she was using the DR in front of her name, and you're not allowed to do that by law. So California has singled out for punishment doctorates of nursing practice like her, and it's quite strange. The term doctor is hardly exclusive to MDs. For instance, chiropractors, veterinarians, dentists often use the title, and accurately so. It's also commonplace for PhDs in any field to refer to themselves as doctor. And as I pointed out, I had a principal in high school who was a doctor, and my father was Dr. Lehto. So she was not trying to fool her patients. She says, I've never presented myself as a physician. She uses the doctor title because she's proud to hold a doctorate of nursing practice, which is a degree that empowers her to help patients. To her, California's decision to go after her represents a ridiculous line in the sand. Not only was her license in jeopardy, but she was potentially being slapped with over $20,000 in fines. And remember, she'd already asked the organization that licenses her whether it was okay, and they said that they thought it was okay. So her and her husband decided to leave California and relocate to Washington State, where she received her license and could truthfully call herself Dr. Sarah Ernie, DNP, without running afoul of the law. In the end, though, it's her patients who suffer the most from California's persecution. Many cannot afford to get the same level of treatment they received from her prior to the state's crackdown. My patients were the ones that paid the price, she says. She now has more freedom to help patients in Washington, but it will take her years to recover financially from the move. She's got to rebuild her base there. Long term, I'm not worried. Short term, I worry every month, she says. Despite all the setbacks, she remains optimistic. One of the lessons I learned from my dad is I'll come out on my feet no matter what. I can reinvent myself again. So just because she left California doesn't mean she's not going to fight this. She says, I'm not afraid of confrontation. I don't like injustice. Like I said, the injustice I feel is more for my patients. I mean, I'm not happy with what happened to me. They took a lot from me financially, emotionally, and mentally, but that was not my biggest pain. It was the injustice for my patients. Now, this again is the Pacific Legal Foundation speaking here. The government cannot hijack a commonly used word and reserve it for a narrow range of preferred jobs, nor can it police the use of truthful language to limit career opportunities. People should be able to accurately describe themselves by their profession without government censorship. If she could afford to hire a lawyer, she could sue to recoup the losses she has suffered as a result of California's enforcement against her. Instead, she shared her story to help Pacific Legal Foundation clients who are still in California, as their rights and livelihoods remain under threat so long as the state has the power to enforce the ban on the use of doctor by anyone who is not a physician or a surgeon. So PLF has filed suit on behalf of DNPs, and there's 3 or 4 of them listed here, seeking to vindicate their right to truthfully self-describe their credentials without risking their licenses or their livelihoods. So, if she walked into a patient's room by herself and just had a name tag on, said doctor with her name, I could see where somebody go, gee, I might expect that she's a doctor if it says doctor with her name. But if it says doctor with her name, and then below it, what she actually has the degree in. If she clarifies it for everyone who asks, and on anything that's printed, like a business card or a letterhead or an email signature, if it clarifies that, then I don't see a problem with it. And like I said, PhDs have been around for a long, long time. The only objection I have is occasionally you'll hear a story about someone who got an honorary one. So like a comedian gets an honorary PhD from someplace. Can't go around calling themselves doctor and say, well, I got an honorary PhD. You need to call me doctor. No, I don't. But if you put in all the work to get a PhD, that is what results in you being called doctor. And you can be called doctor. And if somebody asks you, hey, can you treat me for this? You go, no, I've got a PhD in, astrophysics. No, I can't treat you. Want to talk about the re-entry of objects into the atmosphere from outer space? Sure. Let's talk about that all day long. But no, I can't treat your disease. Okay? So it's an interesting situation because it appears to only be California. And I don't know specifically that California is the only state that does this, but they do it, and they're on the radar here because they've enforced it against somebody. And she did find that by moving a couple states over, she could practice the way she wanted to by putting the DR period in front of her name and then clarifying below that she's a doctor of nursing practice, which makes complete sense to me. So my hat's off to Pacific Legal folks who are backing her on this one, along with the other people who are helping. Brittany Hunter wrote that story. George sent it me, thanks a lot. And so California's law on who can use the title doctor threatens the livelihoods of healthcare professionals, according to Pacific Legal. Questions or comments? Put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. Be happy. It drives people crazy.